Hello and welcome to the Come Tech With Us podcast. I'm Ibukun Itimi, your host. I am an engineering lead, a career coach, and basically someone who's been navigating the ups and downs of building a tech career for the past decade. And I'm pretty much here to share all of that with you. If you're and welcome to the first full episode of the Come Tech With Us podcast. Today is exciting, not just because it's the first full episode, but because we're also kicking off a series, Leadership Lessons No One Taught Me. And today is going to be our very first one, and I'll give you more information on what we'll be talking about as we get into the podcast. This is, the 2nd of March that I'm recording on. And honestly, I do not know where 2025 is flying to. It's so ridiculous how quickly this year is going and how intensely the year started. But in any case, I'm glad to be here, to be having this moment to just sit and reflect and also share some of the leadership lessons that I've been learning with you. To kind of start off the podcast, so one of the highlights of my week has been, we had like a leadership training at work last week. I got to connect with a lot of my colleagues who I hadn't met before. I absolutely love like leadership training sessions because you just get to meet people, you get to just learn new things, see what other people are going through. As I said in the last podcast, it's so freeing to know that there are things that you're not going through alone. It's so freeing to know that like there are people who have really similar journeys as you, or are going through the same things, or have even gone through something that you're currently going through, because you know that, okay, you know what, if this person made it, I will make it, I will not die. So I really love those leadership sessions because it's just an opportunity to connect with other people, learn how they're doing things on their teams. And it's also really good to just like get a break. I think as leaders, we often are very focused on, our team's growth and, the product that we're managing. But it's good to be able to step away from all of that and have a bit of a day to yourself to just like think about your own growth as well. And so that I think was the highlight of my week last week. But yeah, really good to be connecting with you all on the podcast today. So we're going to be starting off with our question of the day segment, which is basically where I answer questions, either ones that you send in or ones that I find interesting and I think would be relevant for folks who are listening to this podcast. And so we'll get into that straight away. All right, so today's question is, should I look for a new job soon? I know the market is terrible and experience is experience in this economy, but I am at a predicament. As a new grad, I took the first job I was offered and did not want to take any chances. And I'm grateful for that. I've been at my new job for a month and I truly do not like it or see myself enjoying it in the future. My boss is very toxic. I'm stuck in a lab the entire day staring at a computer. The job was advertised as a software development role, but there's really no development. I am more of a tester and run automated scripts on devices, which really isn't what I went to college for. According to my boss, I won't even write a single line of code. The job is very boring and very slow, and I know everyone doesn't love their job, but as engineers, I feel we should somewhat enjoy our job. That's the reason why I became one, at least. I also have a feeling I am kind of stuck in this role for at least a year, according to my coworkers. My coworkers are amazing people, and there are genuinely a lot of friendly people at this company, which makes my days go by faster. My pay is also 85,000 USD in Northeast, which is pretty fair in my opinion. So yeah, this poster is asking, should I look for a new job soon? Now, I'm going to go through, the different parts of this question and kind of just talk through it from the top down and see, as much as I can address some of the question. I think the first thing I want to just talk about is, obviously, as a new grad, taking the first job that they were offered and being really grateful for that. And I do like that attitude of being very grateful. I do know that like in this economy, there's been a lot about the job market and the job market being so difficult to navigate. And I can imagine as a new grad just wanting to get a job and finally getting in and just like jumping at it, which is completely understandable. Now, the first thing I would say, which is not necessarily only relevant for this poster, but to anyone listening, is that before you get a job, there are a few things to consider. Now, it's one thing to just want a job and to be at that job, but really going into the company, you want to understand the culture that they have. You want to understand, if it will be a good fit for you, what does the day-to-day look like of the job, and if that's something that you would enjoy. And I think, for anyone who is in this situation where they're looking for for a job now, what you can do to prevent, being in a situation where you're stuck in a role that you don't love or you don't enjoy is pretty much just like asking the right questions and speaking to as many people as you can. So in the interview, when they say, do you have a question at the end? This is your time to vet the company to see if it's something that you're going to enjoy. You can ask questions like, what is the day-to-day of this role going to look like? If I joined, what are some of the projects that I'll be working on? How do you think, the team gets along? What are, some of the challenges that the team is facing? What is most important to the company, and how does the company, take care of its employees? Just there's so many questions that you can ask. Bonus tip, just go into ChatGPT and say, give me a list of questions that I can ask to understand what the culture of a company would be like before I joined. If you're meeting several people, one thing that I would say is you can actually say, I have this one very important question that I want to ask everyone, and kind of compare notes. So I know people often ask, like, what are some of the challenges you find, working in the company, or what do you love about working in the company? And when you're meeting with people who are on the team that you're going to be joining, you can ask more specific questions about what the team is doing, what the team is like, what they enjoy about the team specifically. But basically ask as many questions as you can. And even if you don't get that chance in the interview, you can speak to the HR or the recruiter and ask them those questions, just so that you don't fall into the same situation where you're stuck in a role that you don't enjoy. So that's one thing that I would say. Now, the second thing for this particular poster is, in some sense, like, they have some good things that are good about the company. So they enjoy working with their colleagues, and then they have good salary, which, especially with having people who you're enjoying the work with, is really important because it affects the day-to-day of your role. But then more importantly, how your boss is, it holds even more weight than that, because they're responsible for your growth, they're responsible for what you do day to day, and if they're toxic, then that could be a problem. My first advice to this person is, think about if there are other teams within the company that you could move to. The reason why I suggest this is going back again to the job market. It's, more difficult with layoffs and all of that to get roles. And so it might be easier to transition within the same organization. So find something where maybe the boss is a bit more agreeable, easy to work to, and is also in line with what you want to do as a software engineer. It's definitely a red flag for someone to post a role that sounds more like a QA role and advertise that as a software engineering role, because those are two very different expertise and two very different careers. And so I would definitely encourage you to look for internal opportunities first, just to give yourself more of a low effort way to move away from this boss and move away from this team, and to start to find something that you enjoy. Because as you said, there is a world where you enjoy the work that you do, and you deserve that. If you've worked really hard, to train as an engineer and now are working as an engineer, you don't deserve to have that joy and the opportunity to see if this is a career that you will love long term taken away from you. Now, if you're not able to find internal opportunities, then I would definitely advise to start looking for another role. Again, your boss plays a huge part in your mental health and how you show up both at work and outside of work. In fact, I think there's a study that says bosses have more of an impact than your therapist. And so it's so important to be working with folks who you enjoy, to be working with a manager who you enjoy working with as well. And so to this poster, I would say all the best. But just to recap my answer, first of all, look for internal opportunities where you can. And then second of all, if you can't find that, look for other opportunities outside. If you got this job, it means that you have the skills to get another job, and it's only a matter of time before you get it. And even if it takes time, at the very least, you have that hope that you're holding on to, knowing that you would still be able to find a different job at some point. But yeah, all the best, and we're going to get into today's topic. So as I said, we're going to be starting off the very first series of the podcast, Leadership Lessons No One Taught Me. And today's topic is going to be redefining your value as a leader. Now, one of the things that I struggled with when I first became a lead, and even for many years after that, was redefining my value, going from being an individual contributor to being a manager or a leader. Now, what do I mean by that? For the most of your career, you start off as an individual contributor. You write code, you build infrastructure, you're basically responsible for your own outputs. Now, when you become a manager, you go from being this very productive human being to being someone who is leading meetings, bringing people together, doing one-on-ones, and you might not be getting as much opportunity to write as much code or to be as close to the code as before. And so it takes a toll on most leaders to kind of balance this newfound responsibilities, because they feel like the way I have delivered value in the past is by writing code, and if I'm not doing that anymore, then of what value am I to my team? And especially when you're coming from many years of being very individual contributor led, and if you've especially not grown into more of that staff or principal where some of these people responsibilities start to show up, if you're going from somewhere between intermediate to like slightly senior engineer straight into being a manager, honestly, it's a mind warp. And the interesting thing is, for the longest time, I felt like I was the only one who felt this way, until I believe I attended some leadership training, and I realized that so many leaders feel this way. And it took me such a long time to get to this point where, one, I could even articulate what that problem was, but two, start to like think about how to get out of it. Now, to give you some context to my journey, I'll share where I've come from and like how I've gotten here basically. So I did this fun exercise last week on just like thinking about my career in thirds. I had a very different answer last week, but I'm going to share 3 different points in my career that I think are very instrumental to like my leadership and how I think about my value as a leader. The first one is my very first job. So started out that job as a backend engineer. Within a year, I decided to move to the DevOps team. Then within a few years, I was probably like the most tenured person on that team. So a lot of the more senior folks had left, and it meant that I got introduced to leadership really early in my career. So I had to be responsible technically. I had to really understand like what we were doing. Like before, even if I was just maintaining and supporting, at that point I really needed to go like to understand from scratch, like how do we build infrastructure. So I was in the DevOps team, so we had to manage our CI/CD, so like deployments. We had to manage things like our cloud resources, so AWS, monitoring and all those things. And so I had to spend a lot of time just understanding the basics and the foundation, and then having to teach that to other people. And so I got thrust into leadership really early in my career. And I think at that point, I kind of realized that, okay, people, infrastructure, that's kind of where my thing is, right? So I knew that going forward in my career, I would continue to work in infrastructure, and I would also want to work with people. And so that was a very defining part of my career. Now, the second part of my career was working in a startup. And there I learned the value of ownership and just being in charge of your career. And so when I joined that, I realized that there were certain areas of DevOps and infrastructure that I was interested in. And so I started just saying, oh, hey, I think we should invest in this. I think we should invest in this, types of infrastructure. And so slowly I started building out what observability looked like at the startup. And so that was from building out, how we were responding to incidents, how engineers were, managing the services that they were responsible for, and all the things that came along with that. And I realized that not only was I building that on behalf of the company, but that was me also kind of realizing that this is something that I'm really passionate about, and this is something that I can conceptualize in my mind and then make happen. So it was like, this is my career, this is my thing, and this is something that I'm going to continue to, grow and push. And as long as I'm in the right environment, I will get the support. And so after a few years of doing that within the team that I joined, I got the opportunity to start up a different team. And so that was my foray into like leadership, building a new team from scratch. I think we were 2, myself and somebody else, and by the time I left, I think there were about 5 engineers on the team or so. And so that was my first foray into like, one, understanding really true ownership and just driving change, and then also full-blown like leadership, really being responsible for a team and building out a team, which was really interesting. Now, one thing you would note in the first role that I talked about and the second role is I was a part of the team and kind of grew into that leadership position, right? Now, the third thing that I would say was impactful of my leadership journey was joining a team where I wasn't a part of like the technical team from scratch, but then I joined as their manager. And so that for me was an eye-opener, because you're coming in almost as an outsider. You don't have as much, context on the tech, but you have to be the leader. You have to be the manager. You have to help them build the right things, help them think about working the right way. And so for me, a lot of the things that I was doing initially, like, was around just talking to people, figuring out what is the team building, what are the challenges that the team has, has, and pretty much just trying to lead the team in the right direction, even though I didn't have all the technical context that I would have, like if I was previously an engineer on the team and then joining and then, kind of growing up to be their manager. And I think in the previous times, I definitely had, questions in my mind around, what is the value that I'm going to bring to the team, especially when I became a manager. At first, I always felt like, oh my gosh, how am I going to help this person grow in their career? Like, I'm just here, just trying to grow my own career. How do I know that I'll be able to give them the right feedback and all of that? Those were the questions in my mind. But because I had a lot of the technical context, it never really occurred to me that like there would be a time in my career where I might not have the technical context, but I still have to bring value to the team one way or the other. And so going into this third part of my career where I'm joining as a manager, I am ramping up on the technical context, but still expected to be helping the team be productive. That was where I encountered this, really big question of like, what is the value that I bring to the team as a manager and as a leader? And so it took me a while to like really reflect on this and really come to terms with the fact that sometimes your technical skills are not the most important things that you can bring to a team, especially if you're not joining that team as an engineer. If you're joining as an engineering manager, as some form of lead, sometimes your technical skills are really not what the team needs. And so how do you then define that value when a lot of the value that you've brought to teams all throughout your career has been more, based on your technical expertise? That's where, I find that not just myself, I find that so many people have this question. And so I will talk to you guys about how I've gone through this journey and, some of the things that helped me think about and frame what my value is as a manager, and maybe, would help you frame that as well for yourself. So just to summarize, before we move into solutioning, first couple of roles were growing from technical into being a manager, and then the role, my previous one to where I am currently, where joining as a manager on already established teams and trying to figure out how to bring value. This is how I've gotten through this phase of redefining the value that I can bring to a team as a manager. Now, the first thing I will say is understanding what your team needs. As I said, your technical skills are not always going to be the most valuable thing that you can bring to your team. And so if you get stuck in this place where you're very fixated on, I need to write code, I need to deliver this, I need to be responsible for this particular project, you might actually be doing that to the detriment of your team. I remember very early in my leadership journey where, I would have conversations with my manager and they'll be like, oh, so what's your team up to? And I'll be like, oh, I'm doing this and I'm building this and I'm building that. And he's like, yeah, that's cool, but like, what are the other people doing? And he told me very vividly that I'm not as interested in what you're doing specifically as, how your team is doing. And so I want you to always think about that first before you think about what you're doing. And so the way to think about what your team needs can be broken down into 3 different parts: the people, the process, and the product. Stick with me. So for people, you're going to be working with a bunch of people, right? So like a team of people who are responsible for whatever your team owns and builds. And so you really want to be able to think about, how are these people doing? What is their individual motivation? How can you support them to be the best engineers that they can be, or to be the best team that they can be? How can you basically uplift them so that they can show up to work and be happy to be there and be, happy to contribute to the mission that you have? And so what you need to be doing in that instance is setting up one-on-one time with them, talking to them about their goals, trying to figure out how their goals align with your team's goals, and talking them through that process. It's not always going to be a straightforward conversation, but it's one that if you open up the door for, then you have the opportunity to really build a team that's aligned with the mission that your team is responsible for. And so imagine having a team where everyone just comes to work and is like, oh yeah, I'm just going to do my barest minimum and whatever happens, compared to a team where they're like, you know what, this is how this team's mission aligns with my personal goal. And so when I work for the team mission, my personal goal is being achieved. That's the point where you have people who are truly committed to the work that they're doing. And so you really want to spend your time talking to people. In my very first, one, I'm often asking them questions like, how can I support you? What are the things that you want to be doing? How do you like to receive feedback? Is there anything that you need me to know that's, absolutely critical? What are some of the goals that you already have, and like, how are they going? If possible, like if their previous manager is within the organization, I also have those conversations with them as well. Like, how best do you think I can support support this person, just so that I'm getting to know them on an individual basis. I also give them, some backstory to where I'm coming from. So, I didn't just drop from the middle of nowhere, to be your manager. This is my own journey. These are some of the things that I'm working on. These are some of the ways I think you can help me. This is how I like to receive feedback. So having these conversations can help you start to understand where you can support your team more, which is one place that you can bring value. So if you're going from a team of disengaged people to building a team of people who are really bought into the mission, that is a lot of value, not just to these individual people but to the organization, because that means that it's likely that they're going to be achieving the goals that you're setting out for them. Now, when we think about the people, the next thing that we want to think about is the process. So how are all these people going to come together to work towards the mission that we have? How do they plan their work? How do they know what to prioritize? How do they know when to show up, when to collaborate, when not to? All those are things that you can bring your own ideas to the team, but also develop with the team. And so when I join a team, I'm looking at, these are all the meetings that we have. Are these useful? Like, why do we have this? Where are the points where we should be collaborating? How should we be pairing on work that we have? So one of the de facto rules that I have for my team, as much as possible, is to have them pair on work so that we don't have engineers working in silos and feeling like they're, carrying the burden of one project alone. And so those are conversations that I'm having with the team of like, this is how we're going to plan on a week-to-week basis. This is how this fits into some of the plans that we have to communicate to the company. This is how it fits into the company's, planning cycle, or this is how we're going to go about like setting our goals, and this is how we're going to go about like performance reviews and all of that. All of those conversations about process are really, really important. You really need to think about like all the things that your team is responsible for and what are the processes that you need to put in place to be able to deliver on the things that your team is responsible for. A good example is just how often do we have stand-ups? I know most people hate like daily stand-ups. I do not love them, but then I look at the team that I'm managing. There's some teams where I feel like this team is really new. We need to kind of keep together, have more frequent conversations. Something as little as that can be the difference between you having people just off on silos and confused for longer periods of time versus having your team come together frequently so that the more senior and more tenured people can help those who might not have, as much context on a day-to-day basis. And so really reflecting on like, what are the processes that is going to help your team be productive? At the end of the day, what you want is productivity. You don't want any meetings that don't serve any purpose. You don't want any processes that just make things much harder for your team to manage. You basically want to think about what is the most efficient way that this team can operate and what are the processes that we need to put in place for that. Now, the final thing that I will talk about is the product. The product is where everything comes together. Your people, your process all come together to build the product. I will talk from the platforms and infrastructure space, but this is also relevant to other product teams as well. Now, for you to think about the product that you're building, you need to think about what are all the things that need to be done to maintain this product and to continue to develop on this product. The first thing for those of us within tech is like on call. So we have weekly rotations or however long rotations where somebody is responsible for any problems that come up with the product. Basically want like real-time response to issues that are coming up with your product. The second thing is tech debt. So tech debt is where you have built stuff but not made like the most optimal decisions, and so you have tech debts where you need to go back and improve on certain parts of your infrastructure or certain parts of the product. The third thing that you need to think about is support. So you want to be able to support the people who use the products that you're building. So whether that is internally with engineers or externally within like other customers outside of your company who use the products. You might have customer support teams that liaise with your customers, and so you want to be able to support those customer support teams as well. So basically you need to be able to support the products. And the final thing is the features and new things that you're building on the product itself. And so being able to articulate all these four things, how these four things come together and what the future of that product is such a valuable thing that you can do for your team. Being able to say that this is the vision of this team, these are the things that we own, this is the long-term roadmap, and this is how everybody can fit into it, whether they're within your team or outside of your team, is so valuable. And so you can see that by the time you look at product, process, and people, these are places where even if you're not necessarily writing code and sitting down and being like super technical, these are places where you can multiply the impact that your team is having. Imagine a team with a very clear focus, a very clear vision, a very clear process for how to deliver on that vision, and with people who are engaged and motivated to deliver on the vision. That is the secret sauce to building teams that are productive, healthy, and engaged. So these are 3 different ways where, as a manager, if you're doubting the value that you bring to your team, these are really 3 different opportunities to actually deliver value and to build a team that is doing really well and that you can call efficient and productive. The next thing I will talk about, besides thinking about the team, is also reflecting on yourself. Now, as a person, you also have your North Star. You have the things that make you tick. You have the things that make you do, what you do. And so understanding that can really bring everything together for you. So hear me out, right? When I think about what our North Star is, it's basically what fuels us and what guides us in our career decisions. So when I think about that, I think about 4 main things. Your strengths, the things that come naturally to you, the things you're really good at. Think about things that if somebody was looking for someone to do, they'll be like, you know what, you become the person to do this. The second thing that you can use to define your North Star is your interest. So these are places where you might see opportunity to grow and learn. So you might want to be like, oh, okay, this might be, let's say, you're an IC, an individual contributor, and you say, okay, leadership is something that I want to think about, whether that's leadership within the technical track or leadership within the people track, but I'm going to find, opportunities to build on this interest. The third thing that you think about is your values. Now, values dictate how you show up and deliver on the goals and your strengths and your interests. There are people who, what's at the forefront of your mind is like, okay, this year I need to make this money. It means that maybe you're willing to go the extra mile. You're willing to pick up more shifts. You're willing to, do a few things to be more financially stable. But there's somebody else who says, this year I really want to be able to prioritize my health and prioritize the things that are important to me outside of work. And so maybe that's not the year you're working towards, a promotion. So those values, even if you have like certain similar strengths and interests to other people, your values really, help you realize how you're going to show up and deliver on those things. Now, the final thing is the expectations. And expectations is just really what most companies will call like the career ladders. Basically, at the level that you are, what is expected of you and how do you deliver on that? Now, understanding these 4 things help you define your North Star. And in some cases, you might realize that management might be the thing that is actually for you, might be more suited to the goals, the values, the strengths, the interests that you have. And coming to that realization is a lot more freeing than when you're working from a place of just, okay, so I find myself in this leadership position and I have to do it. When you realize, like I said, very early on, I realized that people and infrastructure, that's where you'll find me. That made it a lot easier for me to really take on, people-centric roles without really feeling like, okay, I'm leaving behind, a different world, and like it's the end of my career or it's the end of, the value that I'm able to bring. That really helped me accept, where I was, what I was doing, and that my responsibilities had shifted, and then realizing that there are other ways to bring value, aside from my technical skills. Those 2 things combined, I think, were just really perfect to help me start to move away from that hold up of, now that I'm no longer technical, I cannot bring value to teams. So I hope that this is really helpful for you. It definitely takes some reflection to sit down and really think about what is most important to me, what is my North Star, and then what is most important to my team and how can I bring, value to them. Now, as we go on this podcast, we're definitely going to delve more into these different things, especially when it comes to like people, process, and products. But this is really just a summary to kind of, help you start to think about other ways that you can bring value to a team besides writing code and besides being technical. And I think, again, teams are always going to need folks who are able to see that long-term vision. They're going to need folks who are able to like organize the right people around the right projects and around the right goals and to be responsible for that delivery and the impact. And I think one thing that I really love about being a leader as well is being able to like move away from this idea that like only you can deliver like very certain value. You actually realize that there's so much value that you can bring when you're able to bring more people together. It's like, imagine, one ant just like chipping away at, a sweet, and then they're like, what? It's better to just like bring all of our ant colonies together, and then you see all of them kind of coming and you're like, okay, this thing, we're taking it back to our home. That's basically how leadership is, right? You find something, you find a gem, and then you bring, everyone around it. And because you're bringing more people, you can do more work, you can make more of an impact. besides, compared to if it was just you doing it alone. And so I hope, this is really, really helpful for you, as I have found it helpful on my career journey. Yeah, I think that brings us to the end of today's episode. As usual, if you have any questions on this, or you have any questions that you want us to go through in the question of the day segment, don't forget you can email us at hello@comtechwithus.com, and we'll definitely try to answer as many of the questions as possible, or even respond to your emails. So that brings us to the end of the episode. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify, on Instagram at comtechwithus. Follow us on YouTube as well, and we'll see you next week for the next episode. Thank you so much and have a good week. Bye.